Afterwards, and several other C-SPAN programs are available for download as podcasts. More with Raymond Ibrahim and Lawrence Wright in a moment.
Next Sunday on Book TV, The Black Swan. Nassim Taleb argues that random and improbable events have a large effect on world history. From 9/11 to the success of Google, the author contends that these black swans, or extraordinary actions, challenge our concept of the unknown. He's interviewed by David Brooks, columnist for the New York Times. The Black Swan, next Sunday on Afterwards, 6 p.m. Eastern, only on Book TV.
Afterwards with Raymond Ibrahim and Lawrence Wright continues.
Point about suicide is really interesting to me because Zawahiri is the one who improvised this idea in Sunni Islam that you could have suicide martyrs, beginning in 1993 when he tried to kill the Egyptian prime minister through the use of suicide bombers. He also improvised the use of martyrdom tapes. So he is the great inventor of the use of suicide in Sunni Islam. And I often think, traveling in that part of the world, there's so much despair, and suicide is so stigmatized in Islam that it's so surprising to me that this movement could take something so specifically forbidden and get away with it. I understand what you're saying about the quotations that he makes in early Islam, but still, the Hadith, the Quran, there's such specific prohibitions. It stuns me that al-Qaeda is able to justify this.
Well, once again, what he does is, like we said, that analogy, which is a legitimate root of Islamic jurisprudence. And so he keeps, first he quotes about 10 pages of early Islamic warriors who just literally, knowing they're going to die, go and hurl themselves, die, and then they get praised, oftentimes by Muhammad. And so again, you can see he's saying it's not if you kill yourself or if someone kills you, it's why you are killing yourself. Okay?
But they didn't actually go into battle in order to die. They went in fighting against unlikely odds.
No, well, exactly, but like one warrior would go in, like that one I quoted. He says, if I die, I'll go. So he almost breaks his sword so he can die faster.
This reminds me, I was in Pakistan. I was talking to this Pakistani journalist, Rahimullah Yousafzai, who came upon a group of Arab-Afghan fighters in the jihad against the Soviets, and they were camped outside in white tents on an open field. And he said, "What are you thinking? The Soviet Air Force can easily see you. You know, they'll wipe you out." And one of the Arabs responded by saying, "But we came to die."
Exactly.
And if you talk to these jihadis, they will always tell you that it was death, not victory, that summoned them. To that extent.
And that's what leads to victory. And they often say that because of that sort of zeal that you're willing to die. You know, it's not so many people can comprehend or attack that kind of thing.
It's very difficult to disentangle these motives. You know, how much is it that someone wants to die, that al-Qaeda offers them a meaningful death when their lives may not count for as much?
But it's not so much al-Qaeda offers it, al-Qaeda kind of articulates it by bringing the hadiths and the Quranic verses that would justify it. For example, and this is very interesting, and I don't know if anyone said this before, but I believe that the date 9/11 was picked because the one verse in all of the Quran that does lend itself to suicide bombings, which states, and I can actually pull it out.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
Yeah, it states, and it's in his jihad and the killing of innocent people. It's verse. This is interesting when you find out which verse it is. It says, quote, "Allah has bought from the believers their lives and worldly goods, and in return has promised them paradise. They shall fight in the way of Allah and shall slay and be slain." Now that's book 9, verse 111. Interesting parallel. 9/11, 2001.
Right.
It's often made me wonder, did they pick that date as a symbolic reference to this verse? Because this is the closest thing that comes to suicide bombing or justifying killing yourself. It says, flat out, they shall fight and kill and be killed,
right,
knowingly. So again, going back to this concept of analogy, basically Zawahiri and others are saying that, look, it doesn't matter if you stick the knife in yourself or not, while you're doing it. If you do it and you end up killing 3,000 people in Twin Towers, that's great, you know. And
well, there was a parallel in early Islam with the Hashashin, you know, and the assassins. When they would go to kill a public figure in a crowd, they would slay him and then just stand there and wait to be beaten to death by the mob. That was their expected punishment.
Right. Now, and here's the thing that we have to all understand. You know, we can make the arguments that, well, this is really not part of Islam, or this is being misinterpreted. And maybe it is, but the fact is that it can be misinterpreted. That there are Muslims who will do this is enough, is frightening enough, really. Because you can't see, have you seen, for example, and we were talking about how oppressed Muslims are around the world, and they are in very many areas. But the fact of the matter is, they're not the only people oppressed in this world. Okay, have you seen a Buddhist, for example, driving an explosive-laden truck into the communist China government building saying, "Free Tibet, Buddha's great"?
There have been extremists in a lot of different... They
burn themselves.
Yes, but you know, in the Tamil Tigers, who are really, until Iraq, the leading proponents of suicide bombing.
But did they ground it in a religion?
They have religious justifications behind their actions, and I think that in some respects that's mandatory when you're asking for someone to give up their lives, like the suicide bombers of Japan. You know, they believed in the divine emperor and so on. They really did believe that there was a religious motivation and justification behind their actions.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the thing, when a religion comes into play and it offers that sort of thing. See, that's why people need to differentiate between ideologies, which generally are man-made and recognized as man-made. Let's say something is Nazism. And a theology which maintains an ideological component. Because an ideology, man-made ideology, can always be discredited and just shown how it was wrong, and that's the end of it.
Right.
But in theology, as long as you based on faith alone, are a follower of this religion, and it maintains or it says do this in black and white terms, no matter how ridiculous it may look, it's so hard to discredit it because the authority isn't Hitler or any other man, you know, the authority is God. And if God is saying it, then it's immutable. It transcends time and space. It's not something that applied only in the 7th century, but now we're trying to live a modern life.
Well, people are always complaining that moderate Muslims are not speaking up and countering that. From your research, do you feel like they are handicapped in that, or are they simply not making the case?
It's several factors, I think. One, of course, is that a lot of moderate Muslims probably agree or at least sympathize with this worldview, but they're not necessarily going to commit to it in the same way that al-Qaeda would. You know, and they just want to kind of live and do their own thing. But they agree, and when they read the Quran, and the Quran says flat out, fight the infidels until, if they're sincere with themselves, how can they rationalize that away and say, well, you know, that doesn't apply anymore? And then there's others, of course, who probably, and I think a lot of Muslims around the world are like a lot of Christians and a lot of other people of faith. They just don't even know what their books say.
Right. A
lot of Muslims are content with the 5 pillars, which is great, you know, the praying and giving alms and fasting. And these particulars of Sharia law, they're not even aware of, you know.
Yeah, every religion has contradictions in it. Like Judaism is you know, if you read the Torah, much of Jewish law has to do with the temple and going to the temple. And of course, the temple was destroyed in the 1st century. And so there are many Jews who believe that Judaism can never be complete until the temple is restored. And they're not a majority, though.
Right.
But if you're a literalist, if you're a fundamentalist in the sense that I'm saying, then every effort must be made to restore that temple so that Judaism can be returned to its pure state. And very similar with some of the fundamentalist Christians who believe that
the coming of the Messiah.
Yes, that we have to push the apocalypse and bring on the end of days. And then, of course, Islam has its very notable characters that are pushing the same thing. They have, in many respects, the fundamentalists have more in common with each other than they do with members of their own religion.
I agree with that. But regarding that point, for example, about the Christians who have this, you know, agenda about trying to get Jerusalem all ready for for the second